Thank you very much for your presentation and for the papers that you submitted beforehand. I think they're really interesting because often here when we talk in committee or talk in the Oireachtas and we talk about the Bill of Rights, and you know it's a kind of an abstract thing, but I think in terms of your submission you made it real, and I would like you to tease that out just a bit more, that people realise exactly what is denied to people because the Bill of Rights isn't implemented. And I particularly want to ask you, in how important is the Bill of Rights in a society that's coming out of conflict as well? And you refer to the opponents of equality. I mean, I think it's quite staggering that anybody would oppose an anti-poverty strategy. I know we got rid of the combat poverty here, which I think was a disastrous mistake, if it was a mistake. But an anti-poverty strategy is so important for the people that the political parties across the board would propose to represent. So I just think it's important for us to see who are the opponents. I mean, are the opponents just one political party, or are there other opponents as well as that? I think it's important for people to understand. And then you say that the anti-poverty strategy was reneged on by the UK government. But what about the Irish government as co-guarantors of the Good Friday Agreement and indeed the subsequent agreements there? You've made some very valuable suggestions about what we can do as a committee, and I'd just like to give you an opportunity to maybe give us some more concrete guidance in what we can do about that. But maybe, and you rightly outline here on what the Bill of Rights could have prevented. But just to give us a picture in terms of housing and other issues, other everyday issues that people are confronted with in the north. And I mean, who appoints them? The panel of experts that needs to be appointed. Can they be appointed? You know, why can't they be appointed? These are all probably very obvious questions to my colleagues in the north, but I think for people listening here, it's worthwhile teasing them out. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I've got most of those. And yes, in terms of the opponents of equality, I suppose they can be different people at different times on different issues, and we've always got that sort of we've learned into this process of almost speaking in code and not calling different people out. And I think sometimes that's a source of immense frustration for most of the political parties in the north when they get blamed for something that really has largely only been done by one party, which is, there's no secret that is the DUP, who has been using the St Andrews veto, using the agenda veto, and blocking left, right and centre provisions that were agreed to as part of the peace settlement, albeit that the DUP...
Daniel, I just need to ask you this. Why would somebody or a political party deny people of their rights? I just cannot fathom out.
Well, it does seem to be ideological. In terms of the example you used, let's pick that one as an example, the anti-poverty strategy. I mentioned 4 of the 5 parties in the Northern Ireland Executive to various levels sort of welcomed the judicial review that found that it acted unlawfully and it not being adopted. It was only the DUP who opposed that. And I think in the engagements we had on that and what the problem was, the problem primarily for the DUP, that their objections seem to be the anti-poverty strategy is specified in the St Andrews Agreement and in the legislation as being a strategy to tackle poverty on the basis of objective need. Now, there's far more objective need among the Catholic nationalist community in terms of levels of poverty, which are far higher than among the Protestant Unionist community, whichever measure you wish to take, so that area-based measures may involve more resources rightly going to people on the basis of objective need. And if you want to instead have a system whereby you allocate resources on the basis of clientelism or sectarian parity, then a system focusing on rightly on objective need is not one that you're going to subscribe to. So I think the objective need issue was the particular barrier on the anti-poverty strategy. I think I may have got a couple of things confused. I think it's the Stormont House Agreement that the UK has reneged on rather than the anti-poverty strategy. But in terms of the Bill of Rights, I mean, I think it is right that we look at this as this was a safeguard over power sharing in the same way that a constitution is in almost every other jurisdiction. The architects of the Good Friday Agreement had objective rights-based safeguards in mind. There are many different models around the world. I mean, some countries have sort of guardian councils that veto laws on the basis of sort of ultra-conservative religious moral views. I don't think that's what the architects of the Good Friday Agreement had in mind. Ultimately, that's what we've ended up with, though, because we've ended up with a situation where the St Andrews veto is used to veto a consultation on marriage, same-sex marriage equality, is used to block provisions relating to women's reproductive rights, is used to block minority language rights, or minoritized language rights in terms of the Irish-speaking community. So we've ended up with a system of political vetoes that almost amplify, well, almost, it does amplify the power of the opponents of equality in the sense that you can have a majority on the executive and a majority in the assembly, and even, like with the anti-poverty strategy, a legal obligation, yet you cannot get the particular commitment over the line. And the Bill of Rights was meant to constrain power, and we have mapped out, we did give evidence to the Bill of Rights Committee where we went into some detail about things that could have been prevented. One obvious example is the Leafa decision, which was instrumental in the collapse of Stormont. It wasn't just about RHA, it was about a much broader pattern of non-implementation and obstruction of rights-based commitments. I think a case would have been pretty straightforward on the grounds of there's no freestanding right at the moment to non-discrimination on the basis of language anywhere outside where it's parasitic to ECHR rights through the Human Rights Act, but the Bill of Rights would have had a freestanding right to non-discrimination as an Irish speaker. Been pretty easy to challenge that decision. The gay blood ban that was introduced by a DUP minister, again, and I know there were attempts to judicially review that, but with a Bill of Rights in place, that type of policy making would have been much easier to challenge. We did see a re-emergence, and particularly in the area of North Belfast, of patterns of gerrymandering within housing provision, whereby there was one, again, under a DUP minister in the Department of Social Development, there were particular projects, I think one was called building housing-led regeneration, building successful communities, something like that. There was a resourcing project whereby when you looked at the criteria for where new houses would be built, it seemed a little odd. It didn't have where there is objective housing need, which is what you'd expect things to be based on. It had areas with high number of vacant properties, or areas that are in proximity to areas of housing need, i.e. on the other side of the peace line. It again seemed to, and at the same time you had objections to houses being built in particular areas on the grounds that there had to be community consensus before houses were built, in the context of you can't build houses there because Catholics will live in them, which is where much higher objective housing need is, until there is community consensus. I mean, imagine that in just the anti-racism context, if sort of the most objective need somewhere in England for housing is among an ethnic minority population, yet you have objections to the housing being built on the basis of objective need, and an idea that until white people agree that those houses can't be built, that kind of thing, and we've documented this, was happening. That would have never got past the right to housing in a Bill of Rights, which isn't about the state having to, all the myths about it, about the state having to provide every single person with a house. That's not needed. It's about preventing extreme actions by ministers and extreme legislative acts that interfere with the right to housing. That couldn't have happened. It would have been easily challenged if a Bill of Rights was in place. Is there
a toleration then from both of the governments as being guarantors of the Good Friday Agreement in terms of the rights, the Bill of Rights part of the Good Friday Agreement not been implemented? Or, you know, what is available to them to, somebody has to make it happen at some stage.
I mean, the Bill of Rights is to go through Westminster legislation, and that's very important because otherwise it would not bind any act of the British government. And it is not just Stormont that could breach the Bill of Rights, it is the British government. The legacy example is the obvious one. Yeah. The excuse at the moment is that the British government has made up a prerequisite of either all-party or cross-party consensus on a Bill of Rights. Now, there is, bar the DUP, a consensus on a Bill of Rights across most of the other parties, and there is certainly cross-community consensus among Protestants, Catholics, Unionists, Nationalists. Every poll that has ever been done on a Bill of Rights has demonstrably shown that. But the UK government has essentially made up a prerequisite that it will not move until there is consensus on the content of a Bill of Rights. So essentially hands to the opponents of equality a veto over a Bill of Rights actually being in place. And I think and that of course is not contained anywhere within the Good Friday Agreement. The Good Friday Agreement is very clear that the advice on a content of a Bill of Rights, because everyone knew there was never going to be consensus on that, just as there was never going to be consensus on policing reform. It was something that had to be done as part of the settlement, that instead the advice on what the content is deferred to an independent public body in the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission, is to provide the advice on the content of the Bill of Rights. But obviously the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission at the moment finds itself in a difficult position. The UN has not renewed its UN status as it was expected to, because it needs to abide, as a national human rights institution, it needs to abide by a certain set of rules regarding its powers and independence that haven't been met. I should be clear to stress, not because of anything the Human Rights Commission has done, but because of what the Northern Ireland Office has done, in particular in relation to cutting its funding to an extent that it can't discharge a lot of its core functions.
It's the same difference, isn't it? Yeah. But just getting back to the committee here and the government here, and what can we do to progress it, or what in particular?
I certainly think in terms of a Bill of Rights, I think it's very important to counter the UK's line that there needs to be somehow universal consensus on a Bill of Rights before it's implemented, because that is simply contained nowhere within the Good Friday Agreement. It's very important that the government here never takes that line, and that the committee and others make representations to the UK authorities to progress the Bill of Rights without that prerequisite. I think the first step really is the Human Rights Commission refreshing its advice as to what the content should be on the back of both the work of the Ad Hoc Committee and the Northern Ireland Assembly, but also the new context we find ourselves in as a result of Brexit. Many of the issues that we've been talking about today in terms of freedom of movement of the common travel area were never envisaged in the original discussions, or even the original discussions on a Bill of Rights, because with shared EU membership that was a given.
I think your suggestion around us writing, I think on that suggestion around the Bill of Rights explicitly would be a good thing, Chair, if you're in agreement with that.
Sure, no problem. Yeah.
I think, but thank you very much for.